In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna be reviewing images from 28 photographers. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of our photography review show. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub. I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England, and here we are with another episode of this great show which has been really popular over the last few months. We've been receiving lots of images, and this is the reason why we had to basically go ahead and limit the number of the photos to 1 or 2 per photographer, and also that's why we usually divide the show between 2 or 3 different parts. We usually look at the landscape photographers first, and then we look at the mixed team photographers and the rest of the photography categories in another 1 or 2 parts. You can always find them on our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to right now. Also, as always, we want to ask you to make sure that you like, comment and follow this channel so we can keep creating content like this. Now, before we're gonna jump into the reviews, I wanted to remind you about our new photography group. If you head to Facebook and search for Clever Photographer Academy, it's a group where we talk all things photography. We do photography competitions, we review your photos throughout the week, we answer your photography questions, and we have even more photography fun there. So make sure you head to Facebook and join us there. But now, without any further ado, let's jump straight into the reviewing. And here we are in a Lightroom again. We're gonna be looking at more of your photos. In the second part, we're gonna be looking at photographers with a mixed team photography. What it means basically, those are the photographers who send us maybe one picture as a wildlife, one as a landscape, or one portrait, and one as a cityscape, and they don't necessarily fit in any of the brackets. So this second part, we're gonna be focusing on mixed team photographers. We have 8 of them, so let's jump straight into it. So looking at the first one, Bill sent us 2 images, both of them in a raw file and then the final JPEG. So looking at the original image right here and then the afterwards of lovely kind of blue hour with the mountains at the back, and then we're looking at the kind of wildlife photo of this kind of goat. Again, this is kind of before and after. So let's have a look at it. Bill, talking about first impression, I quite like this. It's very kind of interesting wildlife image. It's touch blurry. When I kind of zoom in, you can see that a little bit, but obviously the animal is there, everything is there, so it's very kind of interesting and well thought. When we're looking at this image, obviously originally very noisy, and then when I look at the afterwards, you tried your best to remove the noise, but you can still see a little bit of it in the sky and around. But let's talk about them. So let's talk about, we're gonna focus on the actual afterwards. But first of all, let's move them next to each other if we can. Perfect. So talking about this image and the technical kind of situation here, if we have any information, here we don't, but on the original picture we have. So you were using Nikon D7200, and then your ISO seemed to be so big, 25,600, which is really probably pushing it to the limit of the camera, and that's why you get all of this noise coming out. You also get a little bit of the sensor dust in this part. F14, I'm not sure if you needed F14 for this image really, especially when you're using such a high ISO. You could have gone for F7 because anyway you were just going for this part. There is not much details here. 1/800 of a second is also super fast for low light situation like this, so I think you need to just a little bit sort the settings. For the settings like this, first of all, definitely tripod. If at all possible, then bring your ISO down. If it's really dark, maybe something around 200, 400, 600, but no more than that. F-stop depends on what you're trying to do. I would be staying around F11 here, and then your shutter speed needs to be based on what the camera kind of tells you to do. This would be probably a long exposure image. With the lack of any moving subjects, the long exposure would work very well here. It would make the water even more calm, and it would really work that well. So I'm sure you know that the tripod would really help you. Obviously you try to do your best, I really appreciate it, but technically I think the initial setting already isn't right. Talking about this image and the initial data, ISO 800, so you are a little bit lower than on the previous image. F8, which is perfect. 1 1/1000 of a second shutter speed. You are on 600 millimeters, so really zoom in. That's why you get this lovely blur at the back. So the f8 still makes sure that you leave the animal all in focus. So actually quite well done here. Again, just keep an eye on the ISO. The lower it can be, the better. There is a slight blur to it, but nothing crazy. The depth of field is quite nice, and the sun actually, even though it's a little bit harsh, the way it's hitting the animal actually looks quite pleasing for me. So well done there. Talking about, is this the after? No, this is the original. This is the after. Talking about composition. So a composition on this one is actually working quite well for me. Personally, I would have probably done the 2-step forward and just focus on this area here, because when the picture is so dark, really this doesn't add anything to the overall scene. Yes, if it would be a little bit lighter, it could work as a foreground element, but in this case it's just really dark, so I would have done the 2-step forward and shoot just the reflection with the mountain at the back, maybe more going for the kind of silhouette look. Talking about this one composition, it's kind of interesting. I think it's a little bit of a shame of this, although it balances the composition and adds the foreground, so it's quite cool. Maybe shame also that there is the kind of part of the animal here which I just wish it would be more separated, so then we could be focusing just on the main element being the goat. Other than that, I think it's quite good. Post-processing, this one is fine. To be honest, this looks a little bit more natural than this. I don't know if it's because you add a little bit of a brightness or yellow. Definitely I would look at the white balance. Let's see, not that much yellow, but maybe a little bit less. I would bring down a little bit of the exposure and add a little bit more of the contrast, and really use this lovely shadow that was created with the sun. It's almost like a kind of artistic portrait where you get the sun coming from one side. I think it really works, and I would kind of keep it like this. Maybe I would crop it a little bit more, really kind of bring in the point of the third on the eye of the animal and leave it like this. So that would be me. Talking about post-processing here, really tricky. 25,000 ISO is super high. I am impressed of what you've done with it, Bill, but the noise is still kind of visible on the sky. I don't want to imagine if we would open the shadow, you can see how much color noise also kind of peek through in all these areas. So I would probably even bring down the contrast. I would do more contrast like this, so we can really kind of get rid of all the color noise. And again, like I was saying earlier, I would probably crop it a little bit tighter because really these parts doesn't give us anything extra. Maybe more focusing on something like this and making the composition a little bit more balanced even on the horizon, and I would be happy with it like this. Bill, good for you trying. I can see that you have a good eye, you have a good equipment, so keep trying. Send us your picture again and we'll see what we can do and how we can take it from there. Anyway, take care and I hope to see you again next week. Next photographer is called Bob. Bob, we have 2 images from you, and I believe that I have seen this picture last week, Bob, from you. Let's have a look on the last week episode. Bob. You have sent us this picture, and I was telling you to send it to me a little bit sharper. So this week we have a similar idea, Bob, with a little bit more sharper capture, so we'll look at it in a second. And then this picture right here, and Bob, again, we are on a really kind of blurry, heavy blue image. I'm not sure about what's the style. I wish I will see more pictures from you so I can judge it. And again, really small, even though you send high quality, it seems that it's really kind of blurrish and pixelated. You see, when I zoom in, you almost can't say what you actually looking at. But anyway, talking about first impression on this one, I just talked about. This one I love now. The capture is great. It's sharp. It's a very interesting light on it. This kind of black on the color, I think really works, Bob. So well done on this one. So let's talk about it. First, looking at this image, ISO 1600, which is really high. So again, just always the reminder is anytime you go over 100 on ISO, you're starting to introduce digital noise into your photos, depending on your gear, depending on your camera. the higher you go, more noise you're adding, less it's possible to remove it. Yes, you can remove some of it here in Lightroom. You can remove some of it with additional plugins like Topaz and so on. However, once you reach certain value, you just can't remove it, and you basically need to go and reshoot the image. Now, looking at your settings, there is nothing really wrong. The ISO is high, yes, but your shutter speed is also really fast. And looking at it, you should really have people in focus. You know, 1,000 of a second is super high and super fast, and the people should be in focus where you get this kind of blur silhouette. So it's probably your style, which is interesting, but it's very kind of yeah, it's just a different something what I don't see all the time. And from the technical point, I would just point at the values bringing the ISO down. F-stop is fine, and maybe working with the shutter speed. So if you can slow down the shutter speed a little bit, you can bring down the ISO down. You don't have to introduce any noise. There is no information on this one, but everything looks sharp. The light is very interesting, and contrast is good. Highlights as well. There are details all the way. So well done on this one. So actually this one is very, very cool. Talking about composition. The composition is actually very interesting. You get a lovely foreground element here. Then obviously the shore. There are some buildings at the back. I think this part of the image is a little bit unnecessary. I think it doesn't really add anything to the overall composition. I would crop it a little bit to get maybe something like this, and similarly here on the side, just to get something like this. I think that makes the composition a little bit more powerful, but other than that, actually composition wise, it's well done. Nothing I can add to it. On this one, obviously I know that you went for the signature, but I would totally go for, you know, the kind of square crop. Or if not square, even just straight, just making sure that the main subject, which is the flower, is in the center. So maybe something like this, making sure that really that's the first impression we are seeing. Post-processing, yeah, you done lots to it. We're not gonna bring all of it down. It's your choice. I think the blue is a little bit overwhelming in compared to the orange. I think if you would have gone just for a shades of blue, it would have worked a little bit better. There is this kind of blur, which again, I'm not 100% sure of it. It's maybe your signature, so nothing for me to say about it, but I would have probably done it a little bit differently. Where on this one, I think the post-processing is great. I think the kind of shadows, the retouching is very, very nice. I think the blue on this one works. So this is what I probably mean. This kind of shade of blue, which are a little bit more natural than this, simply also because looking at this scene, human eye will right away know something isn't right with it, because this blue doesn't really appear anywhere in the nature. So just something to think of it in the future, Bob. But thank you very much for sending us your photos. I'm really happy that I got to see the flower in a better shape, and send us more pictures in the future. I would love to see them. Talking about next photographer, Laurie Griezmann. Laurie sent us two pictures again, landscape and wildlife. So let's talk about it. Laurie, talking about landscape, very impressive. I really like the flow of the image, starting with the tree, going into the scene. I think it works really well. I think it's tilting a little bit, but in overall, very, very nice. On this one, this I think is one of my favorite wildlife photos I've seen from you. It really works. The full animal with everything pointing towards the other one in grass. It's full of storytelling. Obviously, the tongue coming out is also interesting, but I think it really works as a story, really capturing, and I really like this one. So talking about technical point of view, looking at this image, we don't have the settings here. Again, we got them from Facebook. Just as a suggestion for next time, if you want to give us your pictures for the video part of the photography review show, make sure you upload them to the Dropbox rather than leaving them on Facebook, because they don't come in as good quality as we would like. Anyway, it's sharp all the way through. There is a roughly reflection. I really love the sky, so the capture is nice. The light is very pleasing as well. It really works. So technically, I think it's very well handled. On this one, the animal is sharp all the way through. The light is very nice. Yes, you're getting a little bit of shadows, but it's not too crazy. I think, again, it's tilting a little bit on one side, but we'll look at it in a moment. But other than that, beautiful, beautiful capture. Talking about composition. On this one, nothing I would add, maybe just a touch of this, simply to bring the animal a little bit more towards the golden points. But other than that, I think the whole picture really works, really kind of full of storytelling. It's not just an animal, I have a long lens, so I go and shoot it. This really is interaction, and the animal is all there. It's all sharp. Really love this one. Composition, I think this really works because it creates the kind of flow. There's different things happening on the image. You have this foreground here with a little tree, and then you have the lake with the reflection, and then you kind of go inside of the valley and ending in a bright part with the sky. So composition wise, very well. Again, just the fact that it's tilting a little bit. So I would have just make sure that it's more straight. So something like this. Obviously you can do it in cropping or you can do it in geometry. Let's see if it does something to us. Well, that's well too much. So we'll keep it like this. Post-processing, you have a little bit of green tint from what I can see here. So I think if we would have pushed a little bit the tint, I think it would have helped. You can use this little picker, go for a white, and then push a little bit the purple. Let's see what auto would do for us. Yeah, you can see it pushes the tint. I wouldn't actually add any more warmth. I think it works the way it is, but just this. Definitely maybe add a little vignette to kind of close the whole scene. And that's about it. Maybe add a little bit of contrast. And it's beautiful. Stunning, stunning picture. Very impressed. Really clean. Nothing extra. Everything what is there is meant to be there. And I think it just works. On this one, little bit of exposure down, I think, because everything is really dark. I think, yes, little vignette, but very carefully. And that's about it. It's very natural, obviously, as always, keeping an eye on your white balance. Just trying to see with the auto. Well, definitely not as blue, but maybe something like this. And you could obviously just add a little bit of masking on the top to close the actual picture. Maybe something like this, but in overall, stunning, Laurie. 5 out of 5 for this one. Brilliant, brilliant image. Really happy to see it. Laurie, thank you as always for all your images. Thank you for interacting with us on the group. It's a pleasure. See you next time. Moving on the next photographer, we're talking about Paul Rivas. Paul, we have many pictures from you. And again, as a reminder, 1 to 2 pictures a week. If you have any of them which you would like us to review, make sure you post them next week and so on. Let's have a look at the images we can review for you. So let's take this one and this one because I really like them. So this one, not this week. This one, not. And this one not. Although they are lovely pictures, so make sure you share them with us. We can review them again next week. But you see the list of the photographers is just going, and there is no way we can review all of these images. So at least 2. Let's have a look if we have any details. And we have your camera right here. 1, 2. I can see that you definitely know what you're doing. I really love this editing effect. I love your colors. I love what you're doing here with the kind of teak and the editing. Lovely portrait with the kind of bouquet at the back. Stunning. So obviously you're using Sony A7R, I believe. Maybe Mark III. ISO 4000. Yeah, I'm sure it was a low light situation. You went for really small f-stop, which really works on the image actually. And 1/250th of a second. So let's talk about it. Technically, I think very well handled. I really like the bouquet. I really like the depth of field on it. I think there's just enough to be sharp. I think one more touch and you would start to lose sharpness on the face, but I think in overall it really works. You're looking at that picture, Paul, and it kind of make you happy, so really impressed by it. The bouquet really work, and I mean, yeah, this is almost like a picture for advertisement, so I'm really impressed by the image, really impressed by the settings. Technically, I think very well handled. On this one, the ISO is kind of on a higher side, so you're getting this kind of noise little bit, but I think in overall it works very well. 1.8 f-stop, 1.8 f-stop, talking about the front being really sharp, then it kind of nicely go into the blur. I think there is a shame that you were not able to incorporate a little bit more the Route 66 sign into it, but that's more for the composition. I think technically you're just getting lots of noise. That's just my one point. Obviously in the kind of darker areas, it's a little bit visible. It's still a lovely capture. It's a lovely idea, you know, to putting it together, but just keep an eye on the ISO. I'm sure you know. And to just something for next time. I wonder if the car was moving. If it wasn't moving, I don't think you should need it to have such a fast shutter speed. So maybe it's just something to look at next time. Maybe go a little bit slower and lowering the f-stop to get reduce of some of the noise. Talking about composition, great. I already mentioned if the actual sign could be incorporated a little bit more, it would be maybe even cooler. I wonder if we could have gone a little bit higher. But other than that, I think it really works. The leading line here towards the car, then the kind of the sign at the back being visible, being a little bit blurred, but still readable, so it kind of works for the rest of the scene. I think the composition is brilliant, and this just really works, you know, it's just kind of headshot with a lovely background, with the lovely colors, lovely toning. Paul, I think well done. Talking about post-processing, I love this. It's just the way I have the JPEG. I think it looks a little bit underexposed. I would have pushed the exposure just a little bit. Other than that, brilliant. Talking about this one, I think it just worked. Yeah, I would see if I can remove some of the noise, which I'm sure you already did in the kind of noise reduction, just to see if that would help. Obviously, you can bring back some of the sharpness while using the masking and making sure you're sharpening just the kind of edges. Color noise as well. Maybe what I would do with the masking, I would just do a little bit of the linear gradient at the front and close the image a little bit more to bring more focus on the actual car. Similarly, you could do that on the top of the image. Let's see. Yeah, just to create a little bit of the gradient and close the image a little bit more. But in overall, Paul, brilliant pictures. Thank you so much for sharing them. And if you want us to see and talk about the other ones, make sure you upload them for a next week episode. Moving on to the next photographer, Raymond. Raymond, we have 2 pictures from you. We have this portrait, which is super cool. And then we have this night city with a lot of noise, people cut out. So 2 really kind of technically and composition-wise different images. One being very, very good, and the other one being maybe not as good when you put them next to each other. So let's talk about them. Obviously, this night scene with lots of noise. Let's see if we have details of the image. You can see it mostly in the dark areas. You see when I zoom. When I zoom in, you almost can't recognize the faces. You get lots of noise coming through. Also, the buildings are tilting a lot, and I think the scene is really busy. So just kind of something to look at for the next time. Your ISO is 800. Which obviously is high depending what camera you're using. The goal is 100. In the evenings, 400-600. Looking at your camera, it introduces lots of noise, so you need to stay away from that. f2.8, depending what you are trying to do, I'm assuming that you are trying to stay around 1/68 of the second so you can handheld. But in overall, it's just yeah, it comes out very noisy, and there is lots of kind of cut people. But technically, I would be looking to ways of how I can reduce the ISO. On this one, we have the technical data here, so which is great. ISO 400, and it's funny because it's 2 different cameras. This one is 400, and there is almost no noise. So you can right away see how that kind of work. Different cameras, different handling of the high f-stop. f4, 1/250 of the second, and it works very, very well. Just for the next time, Raymond, when you send your pictures for reviews, we suggest not to use any signatures, watermarks, and frames, simply so we can kind of focus on the picture rather than your signature in the middle of it. Talking about composition, I think I see what you're trying to do here, but I think the cutting of the people half doesn't really work. I think your building's tilting a lot here, including everything. So obviously with kind of 18 millimeters on your lens, it's really wide, so it's kind of introducing this tilting from each side. So really a kind of lot to work on with this picture. Yeah, I'm just not sure. I would maybe try to avoid this part completely and just focus on this and use it as a focal point and try to see how I can capture it without any obstructions. Talking about this one, I think the composition is great. Let's just quickly get reduce of some of the frames so we can really look at the picture itself. This is the actual photo. I think in overall the composition is very well done with the tree. I think it really works. The light is very interesting from the side, and the girl is, yeah, it's very pretty as well. And I think this really works. Talking about post-processing, I really like how you kept it very natural but still make it very pretty. I think the foreground here works. Let's have a look at your color white balance. Definitely not take away the yellow, but maybe just a little bit of the pink would work. And other than that, I think it really works. On this one, you could start by trying to remove some of the noise, doing it in noise reduction. See, even that doesn't help much. Removing some of the color noise, and then bring back some of the sharpness. I think, Raymond, for this one, you need to go out and capture it again if possible. Maybe work on it a little bit more. Try to see the raw file if you can get something out of it. Remove some of the noise, and then maybe we can take it from there. Anyway, Raymond, thank you so much for sending us your photo. It was a joy to review it, and I hope to see more of your pictures in the future. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Rick Young. Rick, we have lots of black and white photos. And it's 2 to 3 images, 1 to 2 images a week. So it's a bit difficult for us to review all of them. So let's just see what we could review. Let's review this one and this one. This one we need to keep for another show. So let's talk about the 2 images. We have this boat right here. We're just gonna crop away the frame because that doesn't really add anything to us. So here we are. Focusing just on the image. Perfect. And on this one, similarly, let's just focus on the image itself. Perfect. Right here. Okay, first impression. Lovely macro photography, lots of details, very clean capture. Very impressed. Almost wondering why did you go for the black and white, because I think this picture is really nice, so it would benefit from the colors, but still very clean. I really like it. This one, there is some kind of artifacts going on in the sky, so we'll look at the technical part afterwards. I think it's all tilting a little bit as well, and as a foreground, I think it works, but I would be kind of wondering if there would be something to leading towards, or you can also see how the lamps are really kind of leaning here. So either I would remove them, or it's just all kind of tilt a little bit. So let's talk about it. Starting with this one, we have the technical data here. So ISO 100, perfect. f5.6. So obviously you were using 100mm lens. That's why you get this lovely blur at the back. So it's actually creating very nice depth of field. 1/1000 of a second to make sure that you get everything nice and sharp. So your setting is actually spot on. Very well done here. Talking about this one, ISO 100, so great. 10mm, that's why you get having this really heavy distortion. F11, which is great. Obviously you have the really strong element on the front, so you want to make sure everything is sharp. 1/160th of a second works for me as well. So in overall, technically you really know what you're doing. I think it's very well set, and I have nothing to add here. Composition wise, I think this works really well. What you've done it here, the message is clear. I think the subject is clear. I think it really works, Rick. Nothing I could add to it, really. I mean, yeah, it's just very pretty composition. I think it's very clear what we're focusing on, and it works. On this one, composition, again, I think looking at the tilt a little bit, let's see if we can fix some of it in the geometry, and maybe a little bit of the cropping. I think the horizon should be somewhere around here. And then you would need to do something with the lampposts because they are really visible. Other than that, I think it's very interesting. I think the flow works. You just wish there would be some kind of lighthouse or something it would be kind of pointing towards. Or maybe if you would have used little longer exposure, if you could get a little bit of the reflection inside of the water, it could be very interesting. And overall, Rick, it's very lovely. It's very nice idea. It's very interesting, and I actually quite like it. When it comes to post-processing, both of them, I would just push the contrast a little bit. I think that would help. And maybe in effects, push a little bit of the texture just to add a little bit more, just to make them pop up a little bit more. I think there is lots of glow around the subject, so you don't need anymore. And I would just do this to really create a little bit more stronger black and white effect. We can add and push a little bit the blacks and maybe the whites. And this is stunning. Yeah, we could add a little bit of the vignette, and here we are. On this one, what could we do? So definitely contrast again. I would push in effects the clarity to get something like this, and then yes, vignette again, of course, and then do some heavy dodge and burn. That's what I would do, brush, and first add some kind of darker areas, maybe just like this, and maybe this here, and then add lighter areas to really kind of work, not as bright, but to really add more kind of interest and make it less flat. So maybe something like this, just something to try. Rick, in overall, I really like your black and white photography. I think the macro is stunning. I think this as well just need few little tweaks, and it's joy to see your photos. I know you have more of them, so if you want, send them for our next week episode so we can review them again. Until then, Rick, take care. Moving on the next photographer, we have Sherick. Sherick, we have 2 images from you, so we're gonna jump into them. This is almost like a still life photography with some rings here. It's very lovely. It's interesting. It's probably like a wedding or an engagement photography, and it's a lovely idea. I mean, there is not really much I will be able to tell you about it because obviously there is a heavy vignette. It's just 2 items placed on a you know, like a tree or branches and photograph. So we're gonna more focus on this picture because I think there is so much more we can talk about it. So let's have a look at it if we have any kind of technical details. And it's really shame we don't, because then I can tell you more about what you're kind of doing. From what I'm looking at it, the bird is sharp, so is the thing which she's sitting on. The background is blurry, almost on the edge of being too blurry. I think that the blur, when it's so blurry like this, works when you really don't have lots of the foreground elements. So let's say if the image would be like this, let's really kind of zoom in. If the image would be something like this, then the blur really works. Where, or even more, we could cut it even more. When if it's like this, it looks really unnatural because you have all this visible, including bird, and then you have this blur, lots of blur at the back, which just starts unnatural. Blur is great for this kind of photography, but you want to be able to recognize at least 1 or 2 things there. Now, anyway, this is sharp. It looks like you maybe were photographing in a strong light because you're getting kind of heavy contrasty shadows here, but that's about it. Other than that, I think it's quite cool. Talking about composition, I think the bird is in the middle. The bird is in the middle of the composition, and it looks good as your kind of focal point, but I would have maybe put him on one or the other sides. I think there is a big part of the fence which doesn't really need to be there, and I would have gone maybe for something like this. I think that's much more powerful view, but that's just my kind of opinion. I think the bird can be in the middle, it works. It's just that there is lots of this happening there, and I don't think it really needs to be. Talking about post-processing, I think it's a little bit on a greener side. I think you're getting green in tint in your image. So let's have a look at your white balance. And you can see it really pushes the pink. Maybe we don't need that much yellow, but the pink definitely to get reduce of some of the green in the brighter areas. Definitely anytime when you shoot image when there is so much green in it, the sensors start to push the tint of the color in the other areas. For example, when you're shooting image where there is a lot of blue sky, sometimes it brings the blue tint in the other parts of the image, and the same with the green. In overall, Sherick, very, very well done. A great capture. I think the post-processing actually quite work. Don't go so heavy on the blur to the point when it's a bit unnatural, but in overall, thank you very much for sending us your photo. I hope to see more of your photos in the future. The final photographer for the mixed team photographers for the second part is Tarek. Tarek, I have 2 images from you. Now, let's look at it. So we have these cans of Coke in the snow, which really are blurry, first of all. So really small image, 437 kilobytes, 720 on 375. I'm not gonna review them. If you have something a little bit more interesting with higher resolution, then we can look at it, but there is not even data on how you capture it. It's more like a snapshot from your phone. So let's focus on this one. Again, no data, which I think is a huge shame, but let's talk about it. I mean, looking at the image itself, it's quite interesting with the kind of island here and the boats going around. I'm not 100% sure about this amount of space between, although I understand that you want the horizon there, but I don't think that adds anything to the image itself. So let's talk about it technically. This is all sharp. Again, it's a really shame that it's really small resolution, because the moment I zoom in, you see it gets all pixelated. You can see the horizon is tilting a little bit, so it's something to keep an eye on for the future. Composition, I would definitely either sort the horizon, which can be done here in geometry, or use the level, something like this, and then you can obviously just kind of push it around to make sure that everything is still centered. Again, you could also crop it so you actually just focus on the island with the boats. It really depends on what you want to do. So composition, it's interesting. It's a lovely idea. I think it works. It's just a bit difficult to see again with the quality of the photo. Post-processing, there is lots of blue, so keep an eye on your white balance. That would be one suggestion I would have. Maybe adding a little bit of purple and yellow would help. And maybe adding a little bit of the gradient from the top to just kind of close the image would help as well. Maybe something like this. I think more importantly for you, Tarek, for the future, make sure if you send us a picture that they are in higher resolution, so we can tell you more about them rather than just looking at the kind of big overall view of the images. Tarek, if you have more images, make sure you send them for next week. We would love to see them. And as always, that goes for all of you guys. If you want to join us for the Clever Photographers Photography Review Show, we do this every week. We review lots of images, give you lots of tips and feedback on your pictures, and it's a lot of fun. If you want to join us, make sure you head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/review. And there you can find all the upcoming dates, links for the upcoming episodes, information, and anything you need to know about how to join us. Thank you very much for joining me today, and until next week, keep shooting.